Okay, the next item for today is to talk about Précis. It looks like Precious or Precis, depending how you pronounce your Latin, but it's actually not Latin, it's Old French. So it's Précis, just like I pray that I will see. Then you can remember, because part of this whole activity is seeing what you should choose. In short, a Précis, if you want to define the word, if you look it up, it'll have a few things such as a summary or an abstract or a synopsis. Sometimes it might be something like a critical response, but that's borderline useful. For the most part, it is a summary where you will very likely go off and take a class where you will be given things to study, to read, historical documents or current events or texts from an area that's connected with the class you're taking. And many teachers will assign a Précis on that text that they give you or that you find on your own, because the skill of being able to do that well, to summarize, to abstract, or to pull out key things. A synopsis, I'm not sure the origin of that, but syn would mean put together. And so you're choosing pieces and putting together. Critical response is you read something and now you think about it. That's really hard for most people. But so that's it. Now the Précis is not a universally consistent form in its specifics. It's only consistent in its generality, which is that it is short, it captures relevant details, it demonstrates comprehension, and it is a transferable skill. In fact, I will read you a short quote coming from a book called Write in Style, A Guide to Good English by Richard Palmer. And he said, I would say that the ability to write a Précis is the central language skill. For a start, it is a craft essential in all professions and businesses. Indeed, anyone whose work includes dealing with documents at some time, and that accounts for most people, will need Précis skills as a matter of course. Such vocational considerations, though important, are not, in my view, the most telling, however. The fundamental value of Précis is that it tests and exercises every aspect of linguistic competence. Now, there are a few different ways that people have tried to define this. So, there's fiction, Précis, which we are not going to really deal with much here. And the basic idea is that you would write one paragraph per chapter, more or less depending on your audience, which is the teacher who would be making you do this, right? So if you're reading a fiction book, each chapter you would stop and try to write one paragraph. What were the most important things that happened in that narrative? With nonfiction, it seems to vary more widely. So depending on, and I pulled a bunch of different definitions and guidelines for students from a bunch of different places. So this is just the big range of what you could end up with. One guideline said that a précis should be 100 to 150 words. So that is a range. It's not as helpful, in my view, as these other ways that people have given the assignments. So here's another one. 1/5 to 1/6 of the original length. So if the original was 1,000 words, 1/5 of that would be what?
200.
200. So your target would be 200. Another way I saw it presented is that it should be 1/4 or less. Another way I saw it is it should be 30%. So I think what we can agree on is that it is in that range, and you need to hear what the teacher says so you know exactly how to do this. But when you have a target length, then you immediately can start considering, okay, how many paragraphs, how many details per paragraph, what's going to get me to that 150 words? Or what's going to get me to that 300 words if it's 1,000? Or 600 words if it's 2,000, right? So that's basically having to do with length. Of course, teachers always give you a lot of pretty useless information along with your assignments. For example, your Précis should use clear, simple, precise, Did you notice? Mm-hmm. All right. Clear, simple, and precise language. Like, is that helpful if a teacher says, use clear, simple, and precise language? No, because if you could have done that, you would have done it anyway. And if you can't do it, them telling you to do it isn't going to make it happen. So, sometimes you just have to, take a deep breath. This one is probably more useful. This one says, be objective. All right, now what does that word mean? We use it all the time, but what does it actually mean? Objective, Eliza?
Not subjective.
Not subjective. Now you've opened a can of worms. What is subjective?
Meaning personal or like your opinion.
Yes, so personal, your opinion. So what they do not want, in most of the time in a Précis, is opinion. So you're not telling what you think about the thing you're writing about. You are just telling about the thing you're writing about without telling what you're thinking about it. But then it gets into a little bit of a gray area if they want a critical response, which essentially is, what do you think about this? In an objective and intelligent way. I was pondering this morning, and I realized that we have kind of a spectrum. On one end, you have facts, and on the other end, you have opinion. Facts without opinion can be a little bit dull and dry and boring and like, why? And that's why you spend so much time reading Wikipedia, I'm sure. Opinion can be interesting, but without a facts to support it, then it just becomes obnoxious. right? And we hear a lot of opinion with lack of facts these days. So somewhere in the middle is the sweet spot, where the facts are clear and simple and precise, but if they ask you for a critical response, you figure out, okay, what can be added in? Now, critical, basically, and it doesn't mean negative, right? So to be critical, we often think, oh, that's my little sister telling me that I look ugly. That's critical. No. What are we dealing with here? We're dealing with the idea of critique. In other words, you ask some of the harder analytical questions. So, what's the value? What's the significance? What are the impacts? What are the applications? But certainly some of the assignments are more on the fact side, and they're not pushing for that. So in general, you want your Précis to be objective, not too much of your opinion, unless you have an opinion about how the author presented their case, how the author wrote that. Okay. You probably have a little more space on your paper, so we'll squeeze in one more aspect here while you've got that going, and then we will try one. Now, if you have 100 to 150 words, for most people, how many paragraphs is that going to be? One, possibly two. One long one. If you choose a one-paragraph format, then there is a little pattern you can use for a one-paragraph format. First sentence. You should put author, title, date, and anything else that would be significant to the reader about that particular piece of information. Then you would use the word that. You would use a that clause to contain the thesis of the paper. So, if your whole paper is on Disneyland, then your topic sentence would be including the thesis. Andrew Pudewa, in his dissertation, argues that Disneyland is the unhappiest place you could possibly go. All right, so you use that clause. Okay, then in the second sentence, you would use, okay, what are the data and methods? In other words, what points does this author include to try to support the thesis? So the data and methods is the support for the thesis. So you identify those. The third one is the purpose. And when you use a purpose statement, you can use a phrase like in order. So, Andrew Pudewa wrote in a tediously long article dated sometime in the 21st century that Disneyland is the most unhappy place on earth. He used personal examples of standing in line, of coming off the ride, walking into stores, seeing stupid characters walking all over the place and paying exorbitant prices. So those are my methods and data for that. What was my purpose? Why am I mouthing off about Disneyland? Possibly to annoy some of my coworkers. Or possibly my goal is to save you the pain of ever going there. So you might say, Pudewa's purpose is likely to save us the pain, right? Or Pudewa writes in this way in order to save us the pain of ever accidentally visiting Disneyland. All right. Then, now this is the fourth thing. This is where you get into the critical evaluation. Is it valid? So, do my claims and statements, are they solid enough to support my thesis? Right? And that's kind of where you move into, okay, yes or no. You guys could have a different opinion. Nathan here would be like, absolute foolproof logic. Pudewa nailed it. Disneyland, never. Right? Which is what he would write if it were for my class. Whereas Amy's probably going to say, he just had some bad experiences. His time at Disneyland was limited to the worst part of a crowded weekend day in the summer, and he simply hasn't enough information to give a fully convincing argument. Do you see? So you're like talking about me writing this. Okay? So is it valid? And then the last thing you could do is, how could this argument be helped? What could be used to either strengthen or disprove? So strengthen or disprove. So that would be kind of a 5 long sentences, or you could break them into a few. That would give you a nice 1-paragraph approach to writing a 1-paragraph précis.